Yeah, I think they wanted you.
Well, we know we have the hardy crowd out there. Rain does not stop women. I'm Susan King. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the launch of the Women in Media Leadership Series here at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. And I want to just start by saying a young reporter from the DTH interviewed me yesterday about the series and the why of it. As I spoke to her, I realized why I am both excited about the series for the school and for our students, and why I am so honored to have it launch with a leader like Bev Perdue. How different the world is for this young DTH reporter. She has unlimited opportunity as she plans her life and her career. It wasn't always so. It wasn't so for Bev Perdue. What makes a public life? How does one shape the values and the skills that help you as you navigate a career and relationships? How and why does one accept the challenge of leadership if it is offered? How does one grab it? These are the kinds of ideas and questions we will explore today and in the months ahead with this series. And for one major reason. The School of Journalism and Mass Communication does not produce graduates. It graduates leaders. And I'm proud to say many of them, the majority of our school, are women. I'm still rather a newcomer here at UNC, and it's clear to me that UNC is a place where women's leadership is alive and well. We have a strong presence of women leaders at every level of this university, on our faculty, in the dean's offices, in the vice chancellor's cabinet, and many of them are here today. I'd like a number of you to stand so that we can recognize you. I'm going to name it Tammy, but if I start naming all of you, I'm in trouble. And I want Jane Brown, our fantastic scholar. Would you please stand so we can applaud? Please, come on. You know, those who I invited who are not part of the school. Because Jane, there she is, Dean of the School of Journalism. And it's not only because I want to say thank you for coming on a particularly bad day, but I want the students here to see their future. I want them to see themselves in you. And one personal shout out, I'd like to thank her for attending today. She offered me, come on, stand up, Patty. Patty offered such a warm welcome to this community, and she has always stood for women's leadership, and I want to thank you, Patty. For all you Twitterers out there, we do have a handle. You see it up there, hashtag Purdue UNC. So we're going to be on all platforms while we have this program because we are streaming it. So the microphones are down here, and at the end I'm going to get a couple of questions from the audience, and I'll repeat your questions to make sure those who are watching elsewhere, dry and warm, also get to hear it. When Bev Perdue was in college and pursuing a master's degree and then a PhD in higher education, there weren't lots of people at that time who were saying to young women, we want you as leaders, not in higher education or in corporate America or in governors' mansions. Bev Perdue was a trailblazer. She put herself in the public sphere, professionally and personally, and has risen to the top of the pyramid in every way. We have much to learn from her, and I hope in this next hour to know even better the woman behind the governor. We will have a conversation with the governor after her opening remarks and with one of the campus's other outstanding leaders, Karen Gill, a clinical health psychologist, a professor, and dean of the very huge UNC Arts and Sciences. Thank you, Karen, for being part of our couch team. And then two of our top journalism students are also going to join in the conversation. Averi Harper, who is anchor of our Carolina Week and a broadcast major, and Jessica Kennedy, a journalism major with an emphasis on political communications and reporting. But first, before our conversation begins, a few words from Governor Bev Perdue, who really has honored UNC and the J School by making this one of her first public appearances since she left the governor's mansion, and really helped us launch what I think will be a fantastic leadership series. I'd like to say, Madam Governor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon.
to tell you all day long, I've been in Raleigh working with judges, and I kept waiting for the text, "The event is canceled." And so when I got with Professor Gitterman, I said, "Dan, why didn't they cancel the event?" He said, "Bev, this is not government. This is education, and we don't cancel unless there's snow." So I'm delighted to be in the presence of these 4 fabulous women, and I'm really privileged that you came out on an afternoon like this. I want to introduce to you a young woman that I don't know very well, but that I've heard a whole lot about, who aspires someday to be you or to be me, to be a leader. And her name is Claire Gitterman. Claire, stand up. So when people ask me why I've done the things I've done, and Susan was very correct, I am older than, that's enough, that's all I'll say. And because of that, she's quite right. I was born at a time and reared at a time, y'all, when young women had very little opportunity. I could be a wife, which is a noble and worthy profession. I could have worked in a company store, because you see, my parents were really poor from Appalachia. Neither of them had a high school diploma, and my dad was a coal miner. So my world was limited to start with geographically, and I could have been perhaps a clerical assistant, and maybe something in healthcare if I'd been lucky enough to have great science and math teachers and help me jumpstart a career that I had no role models to emulate. And so I'll tell you my 2 big changes in my life and why I'm always so inspired by folks who try harder than even they themselves think they can. You know, I'm inspired by a great deep philosopher, and I have his quote on my wall on a plaque, and it's traveled with me for the last 30 years. Now, he's someone I'm sure you've all read and studied. He's the little engine that could. And as you think about what he said, and as a little girl, I believed it and read it and read it and read it. I think I can. Say it with me. I think I can. I think I can. I know I can. And then I had a teacher in 7th grade who actually convinced not just me, but my mom and dad, that this little girl from Grundy, Virginia, this coal miner's daughter, could be somebody if she really worked hard, studied more than anybody else because I didn't have the resources to get ahead on my own, went to church every time the door opened because that's where I was born, and that I believed in myself. And I drank the Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid. And I'm here today to urge you to drink the Kool-Aid. Susan, in her intro, said when opportunity is presented to you, I would suggest to you that you shouldn't wait simply for the opportunity to be presented to you. You need, as women and as men leaders, as emergent journalists around this world, to go out and seek out those opportunities and figure out a way to beat your competitor to the get. It's all a challenge, and you all are worthy of that challenge. I look forward to hearing your questions today. I look forward to an opportunity to continue to work with young people. I think the one thing I would say, since you are journalist students, before I sit down, is that I think you have a challenge as well as I do as a public official. I think your challenge is to be sure to be relentless about elected officials and public servants telling you the truth. You need to demand, as I've demanded in my tenure in state government, working with Don Hobart, who has now joined UNC, complete transparency, complete accountability, and complete access to public records. That would never have happened had not journalists who preceded you demanded that folks who are elected or serve in any public position adhere to the fact that that information belongs to we the people of this country and this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I'm really just moderating today, but I could start us off. And so to that coal miner's daughter, I want you to think back. When did you decide you would have a public life, that you would go into the sphere. How did that come? Little engine that could, you had confidence. But when was it you decided you'd really shape a public life for yourself? Was it very young? Was it after a few experiences? Tell us something of that.
I didn't decide until I was a young woman living in New Bern, North Carolina. My PhD is in educational administration. I intended to manage or be the president. That was my dream, of a really fabulous gerontology center somewhere on a campus that did a lot of applied research and teaching in medicine. And I found myself instead, with the father of my kids, moving to New Bern, North Carolina, where I really did have a hard time initially finding a job, because a lot of women back in the early 70s simply didn't have professional careers. And so I began to work in part of the public sector just because it was a good job and it was fun. And I began to see that the people I was working for and with through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, very sick, older, frail adults, or very sick, frail young people, were really at risk of being disenfranchised by the government. I tried to get the state of North Carolina to help carve a benefits package that would keep them out of hospitals and nursing homes, worked with the federal government, and I finally decided, you know, I can sit here in New Bern for the rest of my life and be contented and do what I want to do, or I can take a risk and step out with the support of my family and friends and run for office. Otherwise, I'm going to be a whiner, and I don't like whiners. And so I did what no woman had ever done before in that part of the state. I decided to run for office, and I'll tell you, the first time that a man in eastern North Carolina, I mean, you've got to remember eastern North Carolina in the 70s was very rural and very, very conservative. And this guy looked at me, a guy from Kinston, North Carolina, and he said, you know, lady, a woman doesn't belong in the House, because I was running for the House of Representatives. I said, I know, you're right. A woman belongs in the Senate and in the governor's mansion. And I began to think about it.
Have you run into him again?
Probably if I did, he wouldn't speak to me.
Karen.
If I can follow up. So you were, as a woman in public service in North Carolina, you were the first woman in a lot of places. I think the first woman on the state Senate Appropriations Committee, first woman lieutenant governor, and then the first woman governor. Thinking back to when you were the first early on in public service and then in the governor's mansion, do you think times have changed for women in public service, or are things the same?
That's a hard question, thank you. And I've thought about that a lot. Y'all know that I'm writing a book, and part of the book will deal with the challenges of being a bold, aggressive woman leader. I think those challenges are real. I have lived my adult life. I made a decision early on in politics and public service especially, not to ever try to hide behind the fact that I was a woman or to use that as a way to get ahead. And I decided that to be a success, and I wanted to be, I'm really driven, I needed to work harder and be smarter and be willing to take risks that sometimes other men and women in my sphere weren't willing to take. And I did that and succeeded, although if you do succeed, there are a lot of scars. You encounter a lot of wounds and a lot of battles. And so for every win, you also have a personal loss. Everything has a consequence. And I think for women, especially at a certain level, if you look at the major CEOs of the corporations, global corporations, headquartered in America or China or nearly any other country, if you look at the members of the major corporate boards across America, if you look at many of the major other entities, you will see that women get to a certain scale and really never succeed in getting to the top. I think it's much easier than it was when I was young, and I applaud you all for living in a world where you don't know there's a sexual barrier, because quite frankly, there should not be, and there is not.
Averi?
And related to that, you know, politicians and women in the media are a little similar in that they experience some of the same things. So sometimes we're judged about our hairdos, how high our heels are, our outfits. Did you run into that when you were in office, and how did you deal with that?
A couple of years ago, I was in the mountains, and this is how you deal with it. You deal with it with humor. I was in the mountains and I was doing something really important that was important to the state, not just to me. Don, you may have been with me. It was a big economic development event, and it's been a great day, just a great day. I was so proud of North Carolina and what we'd done. And I had this woman come up to me. I couldn't believe it. And she said, "Governor, to be sure, they provide you with a better hairdresser than the one you're using." So yeah, those kind of barriers are, and it's kind of fun.
Do you ever feel barriers, Avery, or do you feel like it's wide open?
I've never grown up in a place where I thought that there were any barriers for me. I think that I have worked hard, and I will continue to work hard, and I think that the sky is the limit.
It is the limit, Avery.
So people like you have really, I think, helped young women to think you can take the risks, and there'll be payoffs if you work hard enough. Huh, Governor?
But with the national media that I still do fairly frequently, I'm intrigued by the fact that makeup and dress and just that whole piece of the presentation is so important to the national anchors and international anchors, just like it is to women and men on this campus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jessica, you're up now.
I'm curious how the criticism, like Avery was talking about, did it change at all as you kind of went up in rank? You started out at a lower position, and you eventually ended up at governor. Did you find that the criticism got more intense as you got to a larger position, or did people kind of see your success and realize, oh, she's a force, and that, kind of leave you alone?
I think personally the criticism was much less intense and funnier. But professionally, the criticism is always, I think, more strident as the issues become more important. There are people who have such strong feelings on either side of an issue, and they have the right in this country, thank God, to articulate those feelings in a very powerful and direct way. And what I said before, that when I made a decision of any sort, I knew there would be some kind of consequences, both positive and negative. I'll tell you a little story. I love stories. It's how I've lived my life. I have this son who is 32 now, but when he was 7, I was elected to office for the first time, and his name was Emmett. He came home from school one day. I think he was a second grader, and he was just hysterical. He says, "Mama," but it was the middle of a terribly negative campaign, the start of negative campaigning in North Carolina. And he said, "Mama, everybody in my classrooms tell me you're a crook, are you?" And I sat my children down around the kitchen table that night, and I explained to them that the criticism that you get in the public sphere, whether you're in any kind of position, whether you're a journalist or whether you're anything, you have to be in your mind grown up enough, mature enough, I guess self-confident enough to separate the criticism of what you do for a job and the decisions you make professionally from who you are as a person. And I've been really lucky at that. That's why all of the bad press that any kind of elected gets has kind of rolled off my back, because in my heart, I know it's not really about me, the individual. It's about the job that I do and the right criticism of the outcomes of my decisions.
Tell us about your kids at that age, how you made the decision to run for that first office when your children were so young. 2 boys.
2 boys, a really hard decision. At that time, Susan, the General Assembly wasn't as intense as it is today. And I didn't go up until late Monday, and I came home early Thursday. So I was literally gone at most 2 nights a week. And I just became a committed mom, as so many of you who work in this room are. I drove home to every soccer game, every football game, every baseball game. I logged 100,000 miles the first year I was in the General Assembly. And I was lucky enough to live in New Bern and not Asheville. If I'd been very far away, it would have been logistically impossible. Hard decision, and they tell me today, my kids and I have had the discussions, and now they're dads, and I wonder if they're saying, "Oh my God, I hope you don't end up like your grandmother." But they tell me that they may have missed some things with me, but they also were so fortunate to have the experiences they've had traveling with me and doing things that my office has allowed them to do. So it's a wash.
And Karen has 2 sons, too.
I do, yes. And I feel like trying to be in 2 places at the same time is one of the hardest parts about trying to balance family and career, is knowing my son is playing basketball and then having another event maybe something like this, then I want to be in both places, and how do you do it?
I think probably most of us are quite honest in saying that we lose our friends. And I'm working on that now. I had a friend who said to me, you can't be a friend unless you are a friend. You can't have a friend unless you are a friend. And I think that's true. You have to give something up. I'm glad to know you suffer from it, too. I think everybody does who works.
My son might be glad I'm doing something else. Instead of watching him, he's now in high school. So
I doubt that.
Governor, could you just tell me, what you want your legacy to be? I know some people say that it's the most important thing that you were the first woman governor in the state. Other people say that because you're only serving once, that's the most important thing. But what's the most important thing to you?
Avery, I think the legacy will be, as the books are closed on this chapter in our state's history, that she was the leader who saw North Carolina through the toughest time since the Great Depression. And she made really hard decisions. I will be very direct and have been with folks who've interviewed me about it. I made a decision in early January of 2009. It was the first time after I was elected that I had the opportunity, the legal right, to see the financial statements of the state of North Carolina. And I discovered that we were nearly $6 billion in the hole. And I knew enough about the budget to know what that kind of shortage would do to an institution like Carolina or state, or to public schools, to economic development, to all of the things that make North Carolina the best state in America. I looked in the mirror that night as I was going to bed, and I made a promise to myself that I would do one thing, that every decision that I made, I would make on the understanding that it would be the best thing for North Carolina, that I would be willing to suffer the political price so that the state would be better off when I left it than when I found it. And as I leave office, we're one of 6 AAA bond-rated states. We've just been ranked as the best place in the country to do business. Our public schools are on the short list now of the best schools in the country. You know about these universities. I feel really good about that. And so the decisions that I made, tough, direct decisions to focus on investments in education and jobs and innovation, I'm proud of. And I think that I'll be known as the governor who transformed this state.
Can I do a follow-up just
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
I became dean in 2009 at the same exact time that you were facing the budget in the state, and I remember all of the one thing after another, hiring freeze, budget cuts, salary freezes, and it was very hard for me then to sort of adjust my vision and goals, because I started thinking, with new resources, there's so much we could do in arts and sciences. So I'm really interested in knowing, well, first, thank you for always being so open and honest with what was happening, because I think we all felt that those communications coming out of your office were probably difficult for you to be doing, but getting the word out that, we're in a tough time and we need to, be efficient and get things done. But how did you adjust your goals and your vision for the state with, in the midst of really the most difficult economic time we've ever faced?
It's a really great question. I focused on things I never thought I'd focus on. I ran for office thinking that I would have a pot of gold to invest in the things that I believed in. I had an opportunity to transform services for older people, to embed every public school in the state of North Carolina with high tech and laptops, to do what I need to do for the university. I mean, I wanted to do all that. Many of you know how I feel about pre-K. It's the most important opportunity a child can have. And I had nothing. And so rather than be depressed, I just figured out, let's do this and do it the best we can and make sure at the end of the day you don't let the pundits get you down and you just do what's right for the state. And I did that, and I'm really proud of that. And I would say that I know it was a hard adjustment for all of you all, but you've walked the walk with me, and the corner has turned in North Carolina, and things are much better off. And I do believe that that's the important thing that we have to see the Congress do. I think it's way beyond time in North Carolina and in America, quite frankly, where leaders care more about getting reelected than they do about coming to solutions for the country or the state. And until we have that kind of leadership, we'll still continue to be in the quagmire that I think we're in now.
Two young women shaking their heads on that. I mean, I don't think young people are happy about
hope not.
gridlock.
Old people aren't happy either.
Jessica, what about you?
I'm curious what you think about the future of women and minority groups in particular in politics. This last election was it had many firsts, firsts of different minorities and everything in different political offices. What do you think that increase in the diversity of America in politics will do for the country and for politics and the political scene as a whole?
Great question. I'm doing a little article for a blog, Bloomberg's blog, about the browning of North Carolina and America. I really believe in the next 6 to 10 years, you're going to see significant change in the ethnic demography of America and here in this state. The new majority will not be the old majority. No offense, Dr. Gitterman. Things are changing, and they're changing fast. And I think the fact that you saw so many women elected to Congress is really heartening, because the one thing I can tell you from personal experience, and I would believe you can too, both of you in leadership positions at this great university, that the more diversity that's seated around the table of decision making, the more inclusion there is in the outcome of the decision. And so I believe decisions are better when women are at the table or when people of non-Caucasian ethnic groups are at the table. And I think that's where the country is. I think the Tea Party hadn't quite figured that out.
Averi, you want to follow up on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about something that you did at the close of your time in office. You pardoned the Wilmington Ten. And for those of you guys who don't know who the Wilmington Ten are, they were a group. There's a group of 9 black men and 1 black woman who were accused of firebombing a grocery store in Wilmington. And it was highly probable that they didn't get a fair trial. And why was that important to you? And why do you think that was important to the people of North Carolina?
I've lived my whole life believing in equity. And I've been a part for years of trying to make sure that folks who are involved in the criminal justice system have a fair trial, and that everybody has the benefit of a good lawyer. And I've spent an inordinate amount of my time in the last 6 months on weekends reading the transcripts and reading the data, not just from the Wilmington 10, but from many of those people on death row and from many of the more than 500 requests for pardons that I had. It consumed me, because that's a tremendous power the governor has. And nobody asked me about that when I was running for governor. Who are you going to pardon? Do you believe in pardons? Because I have a long time been a proponent of the death penalty under the right kind of circumstances. And now I'm rethinking that. I really believe that chapter in North Carolina's history was so heinous. I think if you read the stories, you'll see these 9 men and 1 woman were subjected to all kinds of bias and discrimination, and that the facts were manipulated. There is written documentation that one of the prosecuting attorneys actually told mistruths on the data, and that's part of the reason these folks were convicted. They were there. Nobody knows if they were guilty or innocent. It was a terrible time in North Carolina's history. And for God's sakes, in the 21st century, we need to put racism behind them, and I did that, and I'm proud of it.
Mm-hmm. You want to follow up? Yeah.
I don't have a follow-up. Do you have a follow-up for this?
I'm just curious kind of how, what you think about the future of women in politics, and do you have any hopes or dreams for what will come of that? Will it, do you imagine a world where saying women in politics isn't even really a thing? It's just that women are part of politics. Or do you have any big dreams for what will happen with women?
I have huge, big dreams. Claire is one of my dreams. All of you all are one of my dreams. I have a picture in my office now that I had taken the night of the inauguration back in 2009. Bob and I, my husband, opened up the governor's mansion. It was the first time in a lot of years people were in it. There were thousands of people who lined up around the block all day long for more than 5 hours. And finally, we had to shut the mansion down because it was cold and unsafe. And I'm the kind of person, I went out and walked the rope line with Bob, and we shook every hand. And at the very end of the rope line, I leaned over, and there was this little girl. She must have been in 3rd or 4th grade, and she didn't have on a coat. You know, when your mama tells you it's cold or it's going to get cold, and you go, oh. And she was there in kind of a T-shirt, sweatshirt, and it was so cold that night. And I looked down at her, and she was shivering, and around her neck was a rope on a box that she probably got as a gift for Christmas. And she had written with a magic marker, maybe now I can be a girl governor too.
Oh, wow.
And that's what it's all about. It's about passing it on, and it's about getting to the point, just as you said, when nobody notices that the next president of the United States is a woman. I mean, that's where we want to go, and that's why this series is so important.
What's the difference of having a woman in power? You said having women around the table is important, having different ethnic groups around the table important. But what's the difference in having a woman in power making the decisions?
I think the decisions are more transparent. I do believe that. And I believe perhaps not all women, but many women, and from my perspective, me, make decisions in a more collegial way. I, over the years, have really never cared who gets the credit. It's the outcome of the process where a decision for the betterment of whatever we were working on is the guiding principle. And I do find myself sometimes, even now, in rooms of guys where I'm the only woman, and that is tiresome to me. And I really do get tired of the combative back and forth, the testosterone, if you will, that drives some of the conversation. And I think that women in those kind of forums change the flow of the conversation and perhaps the atmosphere. Susan, I don't know if the actual decision is going to be any different if the woman is the actual entitled status leader. But I do know the process of getting to the decision is much different, and from my perspective, much healthier for the people who are being decided.
I just want to make sure, I'm thrilled to see so many men in the audience, so you're very welcome. But we like...
Very brave. Notice my husband nor my sons would come.
But the interesting thing is what you're also describing, this kind of collaborative leadership and this style is really, the research is showing that it's more a 21st century leadership style that's effective, particularly in a networked internet kind of world. So it's, you know, it's interesting that it is seen not just as nice to be at the table, but really an important leadership style.
It is the leadership style. It's totally different, I believe. When I moved into the Capitol, the first thing I did was change the seating area. And another story, if you don't mind, Governor Hunt, who is one of my best friends and my mentor forever, has been governor for 16 years, and he comes into the office the second week I'm governor. I put in a desk that I've given to the Museum of History that I've used forever that really does have tremendous historical significance because of all the firsts. And so I removed the traditional governor's desk and put this woman's desk in the Capitol, and I changed the seating arrangement so that people wouldn't have to come and be seated around my desk and bow down, that we would sit in a circle around a table where we were all equal partners, where there was no king or queen, that we were all part of the team. And Governor Hunt walks into my desk that first day and he says, you've moved my desk. Changed the room. And then he walks over to where my desk is. He says, hell, you've gotten rid of my desk. And so I think it's leadership styles that are different, but I think at the end of the day, it's the process that counts.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I'm a psychologist by background. And
Oh, I forgot. I would have been so much nicer.
So I'm always interested in how people motivate others to sort of get behind a common goal or to get behind your vision. And given you're talking about your leadership style, I wonder if you could give us an example of a time where you really had to take these different perspectives from around the table and motivate people to sort of come to a common goal or a common plan in order to move forward.
I've been very collaborative, but I'll be very honest with you. At the end of the day, somebody's the boss, and somebody has to make the decision. And so we have been able to take an issue and talk about the pros and cons of moving forward. And I'll use the example of the Wilmington 10 because we discussed it, Averi. It was very, very hard. I had 3 or 4 of my team and lawyers who thought it was the wrong thing to do. And 3 or 4 of the people thought it would just be a terrible reminder for me for the rest of history that I did this, that I intervened in the outcome of a trial. And there were equally those who felt as strongly about the fact that there'd been, from their perspective, misjustice done. And I listened and I read and I respected and we discussed. We did discuss. But at the end of the day, I made the decision because there has to be somebody who's accountable for the decision. So as collaborative as we all want to be, I find it very difficult when you're working at the levels that many of us work at and making the really tough decisions that are made to come to a unanimous consensus. And sometimes if it wasn't something earth-shatteringly important, I'd go around the table and I'd say, tell me yes or no. They'd want to talk about it. I said, I want to hear it, yes or no. And we'd go around the table and I'd know where I believed, but sometimes I rethought. And so I can be very direct and say that at least 2 or 3 times on major things, I listened to them and I did that kind of tally. And I went home and thought more and I changed my mind. It's kind of like where I am on the death penalty. All these years I've been a proponent and now I'm reading and thinking and praying and I'm just not sure anymore.
Do the risks scare you too as young leaders? The kind of political price that the governor talked about, do you think of that when you're shaping your public life? Need advice?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm not going to be a political player. I'm going to be reporting on politics. So I think it makes me more sensitive to how I report, what stories I pick, and how I speak to people like Governor Perdue.
I think that's the great thing with the press in this state and actually the national press is that there is, for the most part, this feeling of respect and of mutual admiration for the work that you do as well as the work I do. I think it's very important for you all in journalism and communications to do your homework. And in this fast-paced world in which we live, it's sometimes very hard. The story happens, and there's no time to do the background. And I think that's a huge challenge for you. But Averi, you'll be fine. And who knows, you might end up in elected office.
Yeah. The young women journalists that when in the 70s that I was part of, we really were pushing to emphasize women as journalistic leaders. And one of the things that would be said is that we wanted to see women's issues front page issues. Because at that time, often gerontology, healthcare, things like this were considered, oh, that's soft news. We want hard news, you know. Now all these issues are front page news. And I just wonder if you saw a change in that because your early issues were quote unquote women's issues, gerontology, health. How have you seen that change?
Well, they really weren't for long because I understood pretty quickly after getting into elected office that I didn't want to be tagged because all of my predecessors, and when I started, I was a member of a freshman class, I think of 3 or 4 women, I can't remember, and there weren't very many women in the assembly. And I saw that the women who were there were actually either children's or family strong advocates. And although I continued to be an advocate and a participant, I chose also to focus on economic development and some kind of investment and innovation. And so I wouldn't let myself be pigeonholed. And I think that's what good journalists do. I think you can't be pigeonholed. Although I won't give the channel because I guess it's against the university rules or the reporter. But there's a great ad running all the time now on television where a international female journalist talks about when she was kicked out of the room because she asked tough questions and people thought it wasn't a way for a woman to act then. She's of my generation. So I think that, you know, it's things that are changing and I'm so excited about the change.
I'm going to let Jessie as the next one and then you get ready out there because I'm going to turn to a couple of questions in the audience. Jessica?
I was just thinking that journalism also, like political life, it was largely male-dominated for a long time, and even back in the days of the boys on the bus, it was the men who went around and did the political reporting. And inevitably, there's going to be a time when you're trying to break this glass ceiling where you think, this is just too hard, I can't do it, it's impossible. So I'm curious, was there ever a time in when you were running for office or in public office that you thought, I want to go back. I can't do this. And how did you get through that?
The little engine that could. You know you can do it, and sometimes you get tired and you want to get away. I think it's really important. The one piece of advice that I give to young people when they ask me is to find some kind of place for yourself. I realized early on that I had to exercise. So I get up at 5 or 5:15 every morning, and I exercise, and I do some kind of meditation, and I have that time for me. And Jesse, I've found over the years that I can do that and then get out there and fight with the best of them. But I found a time to center myself and to make sure that I knew what the day was going to look like and that I had my self in order. I rethought because somebody would tweet it, what I was going to say.
Hashtag Purdue UNC.
You just have to get dressed for the game and go out and give it your best. And some days you won't do so well, but most days you will, and you're going to be fine. Just don't quit. Don't quit unless you hate it. And then if you hate it, it's okay to restart. Look at me. This is my 9th career that I'm about to reset, and it's kind of fun.
Who would like to ask a question out there? Right there with the, and I'm going to repeat it so that.
I'm going to stand up. My name is Gabriella Pastrava, and Governor Perdue, I just wanted to ask, recently Republican lawmakers proposed a plan to eliminate personal and corporate income taxes, and I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
So the question is about proposals by the Republican lawmakers about changing income taxes, getting rid of some of them in corporate taxes.
Great question. 4 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe in my budget, I made a proposal to reduce the corporate income tax and the personal income tax. I think that has to be the goal for all of us, and I look forward to that healthy discussion. But I don't believe that you could put a premier focus on tax reduction at the risk of losing the investments that have built North Carolina. So I think it has to be a thoughtful, well-packaged plan that protects investments in education and economic development and preserves the ability of middle-income people to continue to be middle income. And I'm anxious to see the solutions. Proposals are easy. Making things happen and getting the votes to put them into law are very difficult. Great question.
And really working people to get together.
Yeah.
That's the hardest job, I would think, of a governor. In other words, to get the legislature to agree or not to agree, and the horse trading, sausage making, that's tough, right?
It's part of the process. What's the saying, Susan? You wouldn't want to see laws made. It's worse than sausage. I mean, it really is. But it's the hard part that people are criticized for, but you've got to figure out a way to get the votes. Sometimes, quite frankly, it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. People would rather win the political battle, as we've seen both here in North Carolina and in Congress. People would simply rather win the next election than work to consensus and give and take on their issues.
I think I saw another thing. I'm going to give the
on,
young
get
women the
classy.
chances right there. They're going first up.
Hi, Governor, and on behalf of all the Kappa Gammas, we are very
Oh!
I was wondering, what's it like to be in charge of a man, and particularly in the political arena when
What's it like to be in charge of a man? Go continue.
particularly when a man can't go back to his constituency and be the guy who gave in to that woman governor?
Powerful question. Look, I'm married to a great guy, and I can't go home and tell him I'm in charge of him, so I'm going to word this question. I have really never focused on being in charge of a man. I mean, I think that the folks that I work with are equal players or citizens of the state, and you just make the decisions that you need to make. I know sometimes it grates on people's nerves that the woman is the leader or the boss. And again, another story. During the last election cycle, I was in a county campaigning for the president and was amazed that the individual probably didn't know who I was. That's hard for me to believe, but I don't think he recognized me or saw the team I was with. And he said, you know, part of the problem that's wrong with us, we got that woman as governor and that man in the White House, and it just sucks. And I thought, you know, I thought those days were over, but they're not. And they're battles that your generation will fight, and you'll win those battles.
Karen, I just have to get you have a lot of faculty members on both sexes and stuff.
But
And
as you know, faculty members, none of them, men or women, think they have anybody in charge of them.
and they're right, no.
And they are.
Maybe that's why I want to come back to a university.
That's right.
I see lots of men's hands. I'm just going to make sure that is there any other young woman who wants to ask a question though before? I mean, I'm not, okay. All right, I'm going to let that guy with the glasses right there.
Thank you, Governor Perdue. We've heard a lot from this panel about women in politics nationally and kind of decision-making nationally. What are your thoughts on kind of women in politics after your governorship in North Carolina and kind of what's going on in Raleigh right now?
I think there are women in charge of many of the committees, and I'm very hopeful for those women to lead. The world is different than it's been before, and there are going to be and will continue to be great women involved in leadership roles, and I hope that happens. The political parties will also sway the outcomes of the decisions, and you know that as well as I do. They're going to make the decision based on their philosophical premises, and so the decisions will very likely look very different than they would if I or maybe you'd been making them. But change is a good thing, not a bad thing.
And I'm going to let a faculty member, I think, tell us your name and your question. Okay. Well, welcome.
Well, you should be because you wouldn't have a boss.
But get to the point of the question, because I've got to repeat it.
Where did this come from? Am I just wrong? I mean, where did this feeling come from? Because it just seems extreme, and I ask people, and they don't have an answer. Is it just in the media? Is it in the water? How does this kind of feeling about a person in office like these come about?
I think it's the blogosphere, it's the social media, it's the extent of 24/7 news. If you looked at the folks who are going to play in the next United States Senate race in 2014, the numbers there were lower than my numbers. And I believe that actually, as long as the economy is weak and as people are unhappy or unsure about their personal life, they feel like somebody in charge is not doing the right job. And I think it's just a part of the climate in which you live. And that's the decision I made that morning and that night in the mansion, that you couldn't let that get you down. You just had to do what was right and make good, tough decisions. And, you know, early on, I guess I figured I wouldn't run for re-elect, and I was going to do the tough things, and did it, and I'm really glad. But on this side of it, it's refreshing. I'm kind of glad not to be in the mix right now. Maybe I'll regret it in a year or two, but right now I'm not so sure. It's just so hostile and so negative. And I'll tell you one other thing. It's not a question. It's just an answer I'd like to give, Susan, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. I think the money in politics is contrary to the principles of a democracy. That Citizens United case, where you have all of these corporate interests and individuals given hundreds of millions of dollars to elect their candidate to do their bidding, is wrong for this country. There was a blog yesterday that talked about the three most important events that happened during the recent inauguration, and all three of them were around outside groups involving big money. And that's dangerous for the country and dangerous for democracy.
But you know, the political life, just as you described it or asking why, is really difficult. I have always had respect for politicians. I was a political reporter because people who run for office put themselves out there for democracy reasons. And, you know, they gather all sorts of criticism. It's tough. It is really tough. So I have such respect for people willing to put themselves in the public square like that. But it's gotten tougher. Would you recommend to these young men and women that this political life is worth all the risks that you take and the criticism that you face and the hot water and the kind of thing? You know, I mean, people are asking.
Absolutely. It's the biggest opportunity of your life. When I look back, I think the pinnacle of my professional service will have been over this opportunity to be governor for 4 years. I have loved every decision. I've loved the whole 25 years. It's been a great run and a great opportunity for me to change the fabric of this state. So you all go for it, and it doesn't have to be governor or president. It can be a school board member or a soil conservation member. It's not the title of the office, it's the capacity to change people's lives. This is the only place that individuals can actually come together and change the outcome for every citizen in a state or country. It's powerful. Do it. Please do it. And if you have any doubts, I'll give you my listed email.
All right, one of you two get the last question.
I thought you were going to give it to a man, Susan. I'm so proud.
Well, I have a question in terms of social media, because you've been talking about tweeting all day long. There's been some parody accounts of you. Have you seen that?
I loved it. I loved it.
I'm talking about Bojangles.
I loved it. And you know what I wanted to do? And my team would, and I have a communications team who would just slap down some of my cool ideas, I thought. I wanted to set up my own parody account and tell people what I really thought. But they wouldn't let me, so.
You're writing a book, though.
I am writing.
Well, tell us what it's about, and how are you shaping what's next?
I'm having writing a book with two co-authors, obviously. I'm narrating the memories, and they're putting the words on the paper. But then I do intend to write some kind of journal type of book around not just public service, but around aging and a woman going through all stages of life. I think that there's a great hunger for that. What I'm doing next will be announced next Thursday. It's still not public, and I'm looking forward to a different opportunity. I am also doing an educational foundation around technology. We've received funding from two of the major philanthropy groups, and we'll work on continuing to build this paradigm of technology in every child's hands at pre-K through the university level. So a lot of things, and I might do something in the private sector. I'm going to join some of these people on the evil side and make a little money, which would be new and different.
Well, we're really can't say thank you enough for joining us today. I think you've challenged all the young people, the men and the women, about the worth of the public life. I want to thank all my fellow couchmates here, because I really think it was a great conversation, and we've learned that we have met the woman behind the governor. Thank you for that. And come to our next one next month. One of our alums, Kayla Taché, who is CNBC anchor, will be joining us. Place to be determined. Again, thank you, Madam Governor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.